If you are new here, my name is Dr. Matt, and I'm one of the most experienced MCAT tutors and med school admissions coaches in the country. Today, we are going to be talking about students being scared of the MCAT and what you can do to overcome your fear, to feel prepared, and to ace this exam and make it an asset instead of something that's holding you back from med school admissions. If you are here for the live, go ahead and drop a comment. I'll leave a couple of quick guide comments here about leaving your questions here. So drop your questions here about the MCAT, or let us know why the MCAT scares you. Is it holding you back? Let us know. So here we go. Ask your MCAT questions here, or let us know why you are scared of the MCAT. Is it holding you back? Okay. All right. And while we are waiting for the first couple of people to join, welcome in, Nate. We will go ahead and kind of talk about what the most common things are that we hear when students are thinking of taking the MCAT. And kind of the first thing that it is really truly the most common objection, the most common reason people say that they are scared of the MCAT is that it is a test that is not something that you're prepared for naturally when you finish your regular college degree, right? So welcome in, Bianca. When you get on a test in college, if it's something where you have studied and you've done some homework and you've done your reading, you inevitably feel like you're at least being rewarded with the opportunity to recall the things that you studied, right? And that is unfortunately not the experience that most students have on the MCAT, right? Like a lot of students, welcome in, a lot of students are kind of shocked the first time that they take an MCAT, and they're like, you know what, I got my science degree, I got my bio degree, I got my, whatever degree you got, plus whatever prerequisites you got, plus whatever lectures, welcome in guys, whatever lectures you listen to, and you get on the MCAT and you go and you take a practice MCAT, and then just the score is not even in the ballpark of what you thought. And for a lot of us, it's just really, really shocking. All right, first question comes in from Keo, says, is it as bad as people say it is? Is the MCAT as bad as people say it is? Now, unfortunately, I would actually say yes. So even though I ended up scoring close to 100th percentile on the MCAT, that was after a whole lot of work. And the first time that I took a practice exam, I could barely finish each section. I felt like every single passage that I was reading was just way, way, way more involved than it could possibly reasonably have been expected to be read in such a short amount of time. And then, on top of that, there's all these questions, right? And sometimes the questions related to the passage, and sometimes the questions didn't. And the topics, man, the breadth of topics on the MCAT is really, truly enormous. You try something out, you guys. If you are pre-med and you're thinking of taking the MCAT, and don't do this on a day when you're like feeling concerned, or when you're feeling like this is like a really, really long journey. Do this on a day when you're feeling confident and powerful. Google what's on the MCAT PDF AAMC. Okay. So the key here is that you want to get the actual official PDF from the AAMC, the American Association of Medical Colleges. And what you're going to see is that, and it's freely available, right? It's 110 pages. It's somewhere around 110 pages long. Welcome in, guys. If you're new here, my name is Dr. Matt. Drop those questions here in the comments. MCAT PDF. Yeah. Darren, type in like specifically the phrase here. I'll put it in the comments, like what's on the MCAT PDF AAMC, and you should see just like straight up, like free to download. It's publicly available information, but man, it's in some ways it's like, technically speaking, this should be a hack, right? Technically speaking, this should give you the insider scoop on the topics that are on the MCAT. The problem, of course, is that it's 100 pages long. It's a bullet point list that is 100 pages long of topics that you have to know, not even just like a little bit about, but at least a moderate amount, right? Like I'll give you an example, right? Like if they're like, oh, you have to know about DNA copying. Well, they want you to know what direction the DNA is read in, and what enzymes are involved in copying, and is there if we're copying it to make a new cell, that's different than if we're copying it just to make an mRNA, like a transcript off of it, right? To make a protein out of a gene. Yes, they are categorized by subjects, right? So they're categorized both by the section of the MCAT, and they're categorized by the subsection and by the topic. So when you open it up, it'll have like the physics and chemistry section, and then it'll be like the dynamics, and it'll be like like electrodynamics, and it'll be static force and friction, and F equals ma, and F equals g mm1 over r squared. Like there's all the different topics and expressions and everything. And when you are sort of under this, if you're ever in a conversation with somebody who's like, well, the MCAT can't be that hard, right? And you're like, it's not only not like any other sort of grad school entrance exam. The topic list is so incredibly broad and so diverse that most people wouldn't even have most people wouldn't even be able to describe the topic list. Like if you ask like a random person, even a person who has like a grad degree, to like randomly pick any topic on this page, then flip 2 or 3 pages, randomly pick a topic on this page. Can you even tell me what the definition of this stuff is? Like the majority of people, including people who have grad degrees, would have no clue. So it is like, due respect, it is a lot of content. And so, yeah, it's not exaggerating. I appreciate the kind comment, Darren. Thank you so much. Here to help, guys. I want to emphasize to people, just as a person who's at the other end of the track, who had the like scary encounter with the MCAT and then self-taught and then became one of America's most experienced tutors. I want to emphasize that if you are scared of the MCAT, there is a route to getting less scared of the MCAT. There's a route to being successful on it, and to encourage you guys not to give up. Like, please do not give up, guys. All right, next one says, Totally Son says, I scored 518 to 523 on my full length test, but when I took the MCAT, I got 507. Where's the disconnect? Please feel free to drop additional sort of context around that. Like, I do get this question fairly often, right? So I tutor a bunch of students in the MCAT every week, and I get this question quite often where a student says, when I take the practice test, I'm getting X score, right? Like say I'm getting a 516, and when I take the real test, I get a 505. And I always have questions for them about how they got the 516, or in your case, you mentioned getting like a 518 to 523 on your practice test. And my questions for you would be, tell me more about what you did when you took those practice exams. Did you take them under actual timed settings? Did you see them for the first time? Because the single most common thing that I see is that students take the same practice test 2 or 3 times, and then by the time they've taken it a second or third time, they got their score up to a 520. But they've seen it 2 or 3 times. And so the surprise factor, the possible exposure to content that they haven't read in a couple of years is gone, right? And so it's not really diagnostic in those cases. So I definitely have some follow-up questions for you if that is something you've had. Zachary says, am I cooked with a 502? Okay, so it depends. It depends, right? A 502 with like a perfect GPA, and if you are applying to tons of schools and a couple DO schools, I have had students tell me that they have gotten in with scores like that. Generally speaking, you're going to be on the lower end of acceptance rates unless you have like crazy good app with a really good GPA. But you want to push it up higher than that if you can, and you want to apply broadly. But I would definitely say consider doing a retake. Don't rush a retake, but consider doing a retake. If you need more help on that, drop me a line, mcatboss.com, or just matt@mcatboss.com. You can email directly. All right. Next one says, do you have any advice on how to motivate yourself to study for the MCAT? It's been so hard for me. So 2 things here. I do have advice on how to motivate yourself. One is, I personally think that envisioning your life as a med student or as a doctor is a really powerful, positive motivator. I think that the other part of it is that if studying feels impossible, you may not be breaking it up into small enough chunks to make it doable. And so one of the things that I do when I tutor students on the MCAT is I help them kind of set up what a reasonable goal for them is on daily problems and daily CARS practice or reading prep in order to make sure that they have a set point where they can be like, you know what, I accomplished the exact amount of preparation that I needed today. And if you have that, you can generally pace it. It's much easier than this like blinding forest of concepts that you have to get through. And so my biggest advice is you want to do a problem-based approach with a specific set number of problems that you do each day. And that's going to be your best bet. That's going to be your best bet for getting a reasonable bite out of your studying every single day. Thank you guys. Keep dropping those questions here. And if you have not tapped the like button, make sure you like, make sure you are following. And if you are looking for personal help, make sure you drop a line at mcatboss.com. Next one says, Paco says, I won't be able to take biochem before taking the MCAT. Is this a problem or can I self-study? That is a really great question, Paco. That is actually what I did. I was not able because my university had this sort of like on a semester, off a semester thing that they did with biochem. When I went back to get my prerequisites, now, mind you, I was not a bio major. I was a mathematician. I got a degree in math and physics and I worked as a mathematician. I was a Google Networks quant analyst and I was going back for school and I did everything I could to get as many prerequisites in as I could. And unfortunately, I could not figure out how to take biochem before taking the MCAT. And so I did what I tell students to do. And I was like, you know what? Bust out the question banks, work as hard as I can, learn as many topics as I can, figure out why I'm making mistakes, correct them and keep going. And it worked out okay for me. Now, mind you, I had 200th percentile scores, right? Physics and chemistry and the reading comprehension section, the one we now call the CARS section. I had 100th percentile scores in those sections. And I am somewhat convinced, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm convinced that I could have had, instead of a 98th percentile overall score, because I didn't get 100th percentile in my biochem section, I feel like I could have maybe pushed it up and gone for that like clean 100th percentile score. But unfortunately, I did not take biochem till later. So I did self-teach. I think it's reasonable to do. There's a lot of the biochem course that you're not going to actually get on the MCAT. So the MCAT itself is kind of a very narrow slice of biochem. Like a lot of amino acid stuff and a little bit of other pathways and reactions and things like that. But it's not off topic like organic chemistry, and it's not really, really, really broad biochem the way bio topics themselves are. Next one says, I took them timed, and yes, they were full length 5 and 6. Never seen them before. Okay, so I will say, if you took them timed and you had you like consistently were scoring in the upper 5 teens to 520s, it would be very unusual to drop all the way down to a 507 on test day. Now, there are a couple of things that can drive this, right? And I do, if you're looking for retake help, drop me a line at mcboss.com. But the things that we see, so I've had a couple of students who did, I won't say dangerous things, but I'll say I've had a couple students who did risky test center planning, and because of it, ended up really harming their score. So I've had a couple students who were scoring in their 520s on their practice exams, but then waited to actually book their official MCAT date until like a few weeks before. And by then, the testing centers were already full nearby. So they ended up having to like get a ride to a town several hours away, ended up not having any like any opportunity to sleep or eat breakfast or anything. And so they felt terrible and they felt kind of like just their energy was low and they were falling asleep and they just did not do well on their test day because they felt terrible. And in those cases, I think, unfortunately, they kind of sabotaged themselves because of how far they had to travel. And I have had a couple students who dropped over 10 points. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, if you have a big score drop off, is it can actually mean that you got lucky on your earlier full-length exams and you have some significant content gaps. Those are kind of two of the main things. Now, very last thing is you can have a runaway time problem where you get buried on like the first or second passage and the whole rest of the time you're playing catch up, and that time mismanagement can cost you several points. If you want a more detailed analysis of kind of what might have gone wrong for you, drop me a line at mcatboss.com, set up a session, and I'm happy to answer sort of more detailed questions about that. Paco says, as a non-traditional nurse applicant is taking online prerequisites, missing a problem. Is it how I can work? I'm so sorry, Paco, I'm not entirely sure I understand what your question was there. Please let me know. Aaron says, going to night shift 2 months before test, not smart. If you're, I assume the comment is thank you guys so much for sharing the live. Really appreciate that. That is really helpful. The more people tap the like button and follow and share it, the more we can kind of get the message out to more pre-meds that you do not have to be scared of the MCAT. The MCAT does not have to be the end. It is just one step in many stepping stones on the way to your white coat. It is one step in a marathon, let's be honest, in a marathon to get into and through medical school and into the long white coat where you will be a doctor and help lots and lots of people. All right. Paco, I think that you were asking, I think if you're asking about whether it's okay to do online prerequisites, in that case, I would say just beware. You do need to check with at least a couple of the medical schools that you're going to be applying to, whether they will accept an online version of the particular course or courses that you're taking, right? So if it's something like a psych course, I'm guessing that they are going to be completely fine with you taking it online. If it is something like a chemistry course, I am going to go out on a limb and say they're probably not going to be okay with that because they want you to have an in-person lab for most of those sort of fundamental underlying STEM courses. So do be sure that you are checking on that ahead of time because it's not the end of the world if you find out that they don't accept some prerequisite of yours. But if you apply and they tell you, hey, you had an entire year of a really challenging chemistry course, right? Like organic chemistry. And unfortunately, they decide like, hey, we're not actually going to count either semester of organic chemistry because it didn't have like a real live in-person lab. That would be a problem, right? Like that'd be bad, right? So if you apply over the summer or you apply, kind of early fall and you get in during the winter and then you're about to start med school like in July, if they tell you, hey, in February, if they tell you we're going to accept you, but your organic chemistry, unfortunately, even though you knew enough for the MCAT, it's not technically enough for your prerequisites. And so we're going to make you retake those before you matriculate. Well, at that point, you probably could not take the prerequisite in-person organic chemistry courses, like not 2 semesters anyway, before your actual start date. And so, that can become a huge problem. So be really suspicious of feeling like you're taking a shortcut if it is coming from taking a practice, if it's coming from taking an online section of the exam and doesn't have an in-person lab, as long as it's an actual, one of your STEM courses with a laboratory. All right, great questions, guys. Thank you for all of the interactions. I will stay on. We were going to end at the half hour. I will stay on a little bit longer if anybody has any other questions. Otherwise, we will bid you adieu and hope everybody has a great day. But I will stay on here for a couple more minutes. If anybody does have any other questions, it is absolutely a doable thing, guys. If the MCAT is holding you back, do not let it hold you back, but do get more methodical about it. I cannot emphasize enough how many students will spend up to like 6 months or 9 months or a year, or even I had one student who's been working on the MCAT for like 3 or 4 years and was still barely using any sort of structural approach to it. So, get help from someone like me or me or somebody else, but do something structured, guys, to do better. All right. Edge says, Doc, would you say the MCAT is the hardest exam you've taken? No, I don't think so. I think that compared to I would say compared to some specialists like graduate entrance exams, the MCAT is not actually as deep on the content as a lot of people think it is. So a lot of times the questions that people think are really, really deep, like really impossible, are actually utilizing information that is relatively simple. Like they'll ask you a question about this particular enzyme you've never heard of, but in reality, they give you a graph and like you can see where the graph crosses the axis and you can infer some stuff about the way that this enzyme is being inhibited based on the way that the graph is moving. And it has nearly nothing to do with the enzyme itself, right? It's just the graph has the same pattern as every other enzyme that has ever been inhibited, and you're fine. And so it's not that deep. ISSA just 6F1, the MCAT felt harder, not because of the content, but because I didn't know how to prep. That is a valid point. I think a lot of people do. Yes, and ISS med school helps you prep for standardized exams better than undergrad. That is true. If you are paying attention to like your lectures in med school, and you have time set aside to do enough practice step 1 problems, you will be okay on step 1. If you're a pre-med and you do really well, 4.0 in your pre-med courses, and you get your undergrad degree and you have a 4.0 and you go out and take the MCAT and you haven't actually prepped for the MCAT, you are going to probably faceplant. Like the vast majority of students who come out of like a pre-med degree and they go in thinking that they're just totally ready and they're used to these very direct recall questions. Like, what is the fundamental dogma of biology? Is it RNA, DNA, peptide? Is it DNA, RNA, peptide? Is it peptide, RNA, DNA? You're like, well, that's easy. The fundamental dogma is DNA, RNA, peptide, and you're fine. And unfortunately, the MCAT doesn't ask questions like that. The MCAT asks you way more buried questions where, like, in the back of your head, you need to have in mind the DNA, RNA, peptide sequence of events, but they're not asking you to just state that as a fact. They're asking you to use that fact to interpret something else. Like, why did that cell die? And you're like, well, that cell didn't replicate because it had some kind of inhibitor that stopped RNA polymerase from making a transcript off of that gene. And that gene was supposed to code RNA that would code a peptide that would do something really important for the cell. And so the cell didn't survive. That's the way the MCAT buries it. It's not like undergrad where it's just like recall a fact, recall a fact, recall a fact. So for that reason, yeah, I would say step 1 is probably harder. Step 2 is probably harder than the MCAT, but at the same time, it's not, because once you're in med school, you are very much learning the actual information you need. It's not like the MCAT where you may or may not be learning that well. Arturo says, I'm self-learning biochem and physics. I am learning Anki and then doing U-World practice Q, taking the MCAT 427. Is this good? Yes, that does sound like a pretty good approach. If you need more help kind of outlining, I call it the ladder method. The method that I teach is basically how to evaluate the difference between like when you get a problem wrong because of content, like where you need to improve what you know and what you memorized, and what you miss from context or data or problem interpretation. And so I kind of teach people to peel back those additional layers and figure it out, and to be very, very, very methodical about it. If you want more information, guys, drop a line, matt@mcatboss.com. Let me see what I have here. Okay. Yeah. Real quick. I'll do this super, super quickly. My website is really simple, mcatboss.com. And, I have all sorts of different, everything from like you can book an hour all the way to I have like specialty section guidance and exam retaker guidance and comprehensive guidance. I even have a crazy for the students who are like, budget is no concern. I even have a really, really expansive, like 100 hours of one-on-one guidance that a lot of students who do that option end up working with me kind of like almost on a either daily basis or a few times a week, oftentimes all the way through applications and prepping for interviews and everything else. So every option that you could be looking for is available there. And if you mention that when you save a pack with me, if you mention that you found me on the live, then I try to make sure and drop in some complimentary hours there as well. If I can help you guys out, just mcatboss.com or email directly.